Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. This will be the New Year's show tonight. We're going to talk about a number of things, try to round up some of the news, some of the more recent news that's happened over the last couple of weeks, and hopefully some of the news that's taking us up to New Year's Eve. But we'll be talking about a few random, seemingly unrelated topics. I want to mention something that's happening in Beloit, Wisconsin in terms of the idiotic anti-gun campaign. We'll also talk about the Southern Poverty Law Center and their relentless attack on free speech in the United States. We'll talk about some of the questions surrounding the Sydney siege and Australian police state bills and policies that are coming through. We'll talk about Obama's legitimacy, and also we'll catch up on Syria as well. We'll probably touch on the NYPD murders. We'll touch on the Russian economy, and also we'll try, if I can fit this in, to talk about water as the new Enron, and that's something that I've avoided talking about for the last few weeks because I didn't think it was pressing. It's an important issue, but it wasn't pressing. But we'll try to get to some of that during this show. And I think I did last week was a rebroadcast. It was my interview with Bimi Al-Laham, a Syrian girl, and where we discussed the situation in Syria. I had the week off because of the Christmas holidays, but the week before that, I think I did pretty well in terms of staying right on schedule. I got to all of the topics that I wanted to talk about, and hopefully I was proud of myself that week, and I hopefully be able to do that again this week. So before we get into any of those topics, however, I want to remind you that if you're just joining the show for the first time, you can catch Truth on the Tracks here every Monday night and Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on ucy.tv, and you can access the show's personal webpage there at ucy.tv/TT for Truth on the Tracks. Now, if you're interested in some of the websites that I write for, you can visit activistpost.com, you can visit theantimedia.org, naturalblaze.com, irrelevantparadigmmedia.com as well. And if you're interested in my work specifically, then I would encourage you to go to brandonturbeville.com. And if you go to that website, brandonturbeville.com, you'll find all of the articles that I've written, all of the YouTube videos, all of the interviews that I've done, all of the archive versions of this show. You'll find that on brandonturbeville.com. You'll also find an events page. You'll find the books tab where you can find the books and purchase the books. You'll find the contact information, the bio. You'll find all of the relevant information there at brandonturbeville.com. Now, I wanted to get into some of these topics here, and as we're coming up on the new year, as I said, we'll go through these pretty quick if we can, just so we can kind of round up what's happening in the new year. Now, the article is entitled, Wisconsin Police Chief Thinks Guns as Dangerous as Ebola, Wants Voluntary Home Searches as a Vaccine. Now, that is not a hyperbolic headline. This is Wisconsin Police Chief Norm Jacobs, and you can go find the article and you see his picture there, and you can see that the guy looks a little special. But I wrote an article a few weeks ago about an attempt by Buffalo police to confiscate guns of deceased permit holders during their time of grief. Well, the new contender for the stupidest version of anti-gun propaganda and anti-gun campaigns now goes to Beloit, Wisconsin's police chief, Norm Jacobs. Norm Jacobs is encouraging citizens to call in to the police department and allow officers to search their homes for guns that, quote, might be there unbeknownst to the owners. Now, you might be tempted to laugh at this jackass, because he's essentially trying to portray guns as having the mental acumen of brown recluse spiders. Right? The guns enter the home, they hide away, and they wait for the perfect time to strike in your sleep, I suppose. But he goes even further, and he's trying to portray guns as being as dangerous as Ebola. And he's serious. This is what he told Wisconsin Public Radio. This is, quote, "Gun violence is as serious as the Ebola virus is being represented in the media, and we should fight it using the tools that we've learned from our health providers." He says he wants people to, quote, "think about gun violence as an infectious disease like Ebola and a home inspection like a vaccine to help build up the city's immune system," end quote. So, I mean, do you roll your eyes in disgust here, or do you burst into a fit of laughter? It's hard to tell. This guy's metaphors and analogies are so mixed up, and his the width between his logic and reality is so wide that you can barely take this guy seriously, but he is serious. This is the problem. This is in 2014. This is the level of respect for American constitutional rights. This is what typifies the average law enforcement official or government office holder, right? These ridiculous statements are being made by the supposed cream of the crop, people who are entrusted with important responsibilities like police chief. But he says he wants Beloit, Wisconsin citizens to voluntarily agree to the searches, and that, quote, "they will result in the discovery of guns they didn't know were in their own homes," end quote. He says he believes there's a chance that the officers will find guns linked to crimes in the homes. Of course, he didn't mention why he believes any individual who has a gun in the house that has been used in a crime would voluntarily allow police to search the home for guns. And he didn't explain what would happen if the search was conducted and the gun was used in a crime. It was discovered in the home, and the homeowner subsequently claimed that he had no idea how the gun ended up there. Will the homeowner be prosecuted, or will it just be overlooked? And is either option fair? He didn't say anything about that. But, you know, there's an old saying that says, "it is better to say nothing and be thought a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt." Well, Norm Jacobs apparently never heard of that, because he continues on. He says, quote, "maybe we'll find a toy gun that's been altered by a youngster in the house, and we know the tragedies that can occur there on occasion." End quote. Really? An altered toy gun? So I would like to find out who these children are that are turning plastic toys into real weapons. I mean, we should immediately locate these guys and give them engineering scholarships. So the tragedies that can occur there on occasion from altering toy guns, really? Like what? The only tragedies I know of are choking hazards for children under 2, and of course tragedies like Tamir Rice, who was 12 years old, who had a toy gun and was murdered by Cleveland police. That's the tragedy. But it wasn't the toy gun's fault, and it wasn't Tamir Rice's fault. It was the stupid-ass Cleveland police. So, Chief Jacobs, of course, is himself probably not the typical limp-wristed liberal gunophobe that you would think, despite his rhetoric and his ridiculous statements. He actually has quite the arsenal at his police department. If you look at that information there, the Beloit Police Department is the proud owner of a Bearcat armored carrier, a tank, and a robot. And in addition to all that military hardware, the police department has also deployed ShotSpotter, which is a gunshot location device in the city of Beloit, or Beloit, I guess. Maybe I've been pronouncing it the wrong way the whole time. It's Beloit. So the Beloit Police Department has a Facebook page, which I linked to in my article, and the BPD can be contacted at any one of these non-emergency numbers, which I'm about to give you. So feel free to give them a call and let them know about your opposition to these ridiculous policies, why you think they're ridiculous, and have a good laugh if you need to. But here's the non-emergency dispatch number. It's 608-757-2244. Or, let me give you that again before I give you the other one. The non-emergency dispatch is 608-757-2244. Or even better, you could call the sergeant's office, and that is 608-364-6811. Again, that's 608-364-6811. And he has 2 numbers for the sergeant's office. So let me give you the second number, 608-364-6847. Again, 608-364-6847. 6847. And if you weren't able to get those numbers down, then go look at my article, Wisconsin Police Chief Thinks Guns as Dangerous as Ebola, Wants Voluntary Home Searches as a Vaccine, and all that information will be provided. You find that on BrandonTurbeville.com or ActivistPost.com. And if you have problems finding it just by going to the web page, then give you a hint how you do Google searches. Unfortunately, a lot of people are unaware of how to do a serious but effective Google search. You just type in my name, Brandon Turbeville, Activist Post, Wisconsin Police Chief, and it'll come up. So there we are. We've got that. Now, I guess we better turn to an equally ridiculous organization, and that is the Southern Poverty Law Center. So, if anybody was wondering whether or not the Southern Poverty Law Center was still active in targeting American citizens for their personal beliefs or attempting to dismantle the First Amendment rights of American citizens, the SPLC has reasserted itself yet again. And this time they are targeting hate music and what they call white power rock bands on online music and retail services. So an investigation, and I put that in quotes, in scare quotes here, investigation by the SPLC was recently undertaken to determine whether or not the music of bands that, I guess the SPLC deems offensive or racist were being sold on online services like iTunes or Amazon or Spotify. Of course, now, this hate music only applies to white people, as you might expect, right? It's only white power rock bands or neo-Nazi music and racist, country music and stuff like that. Now, offensive and racist rap music is fine. If you're talking about killing white people, that's perfectly fine. But God forbid you say anything about any other minority, blacks or Jews or anything. SPLC will be right on you. So the investigation focused on white power music. They produced a report that resulted in the removal of a number of bands and songs from iTunes. But the SPLC is complaining that Amazon and Spotify are responding too slowly to their commands. So this is what the SPLC says on its website. On the heels of an SPLC investigation that found songs by dozens of white power rock bands being sold on iTunes, Apple has begun removing hate music from its service, though other sites offering hate music, such as Amazon, have been slow to act. Now again, when Apple is removing hate music, they're not removing Ice Cube. It's just these no-name white racists. Alright, so back to the website. Apple is doing the right thing by preventing iTunes from being used as a recruitment tool for white supremacists, said Heidi Byrick, director of the SPLC's Intelligence Project. Amazon and other online retailers that continue to sell this music need to realize that they are providing a powerful platform for extremists to reach young people with messages that advocate hate and violence against African Americans, Jews, and others. Alright, so as I said, SPLC not concerned with music that might reach young people with messages that advocate hate and violence against Caucasians, since the focus is on white power bands, as it was from the outset. Now, I'm not obviously advocating that we be fair by going after black rap music and that sort of thing. What I'm advocating is that the SPLC should just shut the hell up and just disappear into the shadows where it belongs, into the cesspit of history, because that's where that organization belongs. Now, some of the lyrics that the SPLC cited, I'm always very careful to just read 2 lines of a song and then determine that it's racist or determine that it's satanic or determine that it's anti-New World Order or whatever, because if you know anything about art, if you know anything about music, you really need to keep things in context. You really need to experience the art or the music to determine what it's saying. I happen to know that for a fact. And some things, when put in context, are not the same as what you might believe it to be when you take it with just 1 or 2 lines. But regardless, if you just take in the 1 or 2 lines, I mean, some of the lines that I read that were provided by the SPLC were undoubtedly racist. I mean, they were deplorable. But the SPLC, which has now set itself up as the arbiter of all that is race and justice related, is essentially allowed to erase an artist's freedom of expression and the right of the consumer to hear it and see it. You see, the First Amendment exists in order to protect unpopular speech, no matter how strongly we may disagree with the statements that are being made. While in this case, the songs were actually removed by a decision of a private company after being lobbied by the SPLC, it's also true that the SPLC has made a career out of promoting acts and expressions of hate themselves, only to be seen as the opponent of these very acts and savior of the perceived targets. So remember, the SPLC is notorious. It was the organization that deemed libertarians and constitutionalists, patriots and militias as hate groups, as well as for this just non-stop paranoia and fear-mongering over what the SPLC labels conspiracy theorists and anti-government extremists. It's funny, SPLC was started in the 60s. Nobody wants to point this out. But it was a revolutionary organization because they were fighting for the rights of black people, right? And this was institutionalized racism and institutionalized oppression, which would have put the SPLC in direct opposition to the government, which would have made the SPLC an anti-government extremist group. Well, anyway, of course, the individuals that are lumped into at least two of the categories that I mentioned above, like the libertarians, the constitutionalists, patriots, and militia. Now, that's four groups, but at least two of these categories are generally obsessed with upholding and respecting the U.S. Constitution. At least two of them. And I think you could argue that the majority of all four of those groups are obsessed with respecting the Constitution and upholding the Constitution, which is the founding document of the United States government. But, facts have never mattered to the SPLC. According to the SPLC, being pro-Constitution makes you anti-government. And the SPLC was never an anti-government extremist group, by the way. I'm only just saying that to point out the hypocrisy on one level. The truth is the SPLC was always created to be what it is, which was a big foundation, foundation-backed, non-governmental organization, divide and conquer group, and sort of ultra-left lobby group that's controlled by the top to lobby for the goals of the oligarchy. So, we also know that the SPLC is well known for its tight working relationship with the FBI, as many other law enforcement agencies across the country as well, but especially the FBI. And it's known that the FBI itself controls most of those white supremacist groups that are operating inside the United States that the SPLC continues to panic over and fearmonger over. So we have this close relationship between the SPLC and the FBI, particularly in the area of hate groups. You got to question whether or not, or the exact role that the SPLC plays in hate crimes and hate groups in general. So instead of looking at the SPLC as the defender of all that is, of all the victims of racism and hate groups, you actually got to look at what their role is in terms of the perpetration of those acts of violence and that sort of thing. So, its fascination with hate music on the internet, it just rings somewhat hollow on my ears and on many ears that are informed about what the SPLC was and is and continues to be. Now, take for instance the group like the National Alliance. The National Alliance is a white supremacist group, and it's controlled by the FBI, like most white supremacist groups. In 2007, its leader, it was Green Beret David Kellerman, he even came out and said that he worked for the FBI. He was on trial on weapons charges, and he said This is a quote coming from the Miami Herald. He says, Citi went to work for the FBI with orders to infiltrate the National Alliance, a neo-Nazi group, in 2000 and relay intelligence. The group's founder wrote a book that is widely believed to have inspired the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing. So, you got to look. In 2005, there were court papers that revealed that the SPLC ran an informant. And you can take the term informant and mix it with agent provocateur. They're all largely the same, especially in terms of these types of issues. They ran an informant at Elohim City prior to the bombing of the Murrah Federal Building in 1995. And in fact, when you look at the McCurtain Daily Gazette in October of 2005, written by J.D. Cash, this is what Cash has to say. He says, the potentially explosive contents of the teletype, among other things, exposed for the first time an informant operation being conducted by nationally known civil rights lawyer Morris Dees through his organization, the Southern Poverty Law Center. Alright, so we have plenty of details that are available out there that the FBI acknowledged the SPLC was engaged in an undercover role where essentially it monitored subjects for the FBI. That were believed to be linked to Timothy McVeigh, right? But the compound at Elohim City, let me step back here. I'm confusing. The way I'm presenting this is confusing. The FBI acknowledged publicly that the Southern Poverty Law Center was engaged in an undercover role, and that undercover role was monitoring and infiltrating and providing informants and essentially agent provocateurs to these white supremacist groups. One of these white supremacist groups was the compound at Elohim City, and also there was the German guy, he was from Germany, Andreas Karl Strassmeyer, right? Strassmeyer was a German intelligence officer, but he was also a leader of the Aryan Republican Army at Elohim City. He was a leader, not the leader, but he was a leader. Robert Millar was the leader, and he worked closely with the FBI. So Millar repeatedly shared information with law enforcement about the goings-on at the Aryan Republican Army. In June 1997, actually June 31st, it was a court proceeding, the FBI senior agent Peter Rickel testified that Millar was in regular contact with the agency in the years before the bombing, and that was also written, Jim Redden wrote that in his book Snitch Culture. So there was also 1st SS Cavalry Brigade Motorcycle Division. There was a bust in 2012, and it was just it was exposed there that the FBI had a lot of control over these white supremacist groups. In fact, most of the white supremacist groups. Remember that you've also got people like Hal Turner, who said he was a national security intelligence asset working for the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force. He had a code name of Valhalla, and he received thousands of dollars from the FBI to report on groups like the Aryan Nations and the white supremacist groups and the National Alliance. He was even a member of the Blue-Eyed Devils, that skinhead punk band. The FBI has run racist groups, white supremacist groups, since the 1960s. Under COINTELPRO, the FBI not only followed around Martin Luther King and put out information that was supposed to incriminate and ruin the reputation of Martin Luther King, but they also armed and directed and protected and subsidized the KKK and other right-wing groups as well. They were using these racist groups to create a strategy of tension, a divide and conquer. They would attack groups on the left, including anti-war groups, Chicano groups, Puerto Rican groups, blacks, and that sort of thing. So I kind of went off on a tangent, but despite all this hype by the conservative media outlets earlier in the year, the SPLC continues to work closely with the FBI. The SPLC was removed from the FBI's webpage after some of this stuff came out. After the SPLC was becoming more and more discredited, they removed the names from the webpage of organizations that were involved in working with the FBI. The FBI actually officially removed those names because they were only having official government agencies on the website. And the FBI and the SPLC later came out and said, no, there's been no change in status. They've just made a change to the web page. Conservative groups were all out claiming victory and stuff. Once again, the false left-right paradigm leaving you with a false sense of victory. So let's just quickly, we got to go through this a little bit faster here if we can. The Southern Poverty Law Center website. Let me read you 4 paragraphs from that. Southern Poverty Law Center regularly conducts in-person training sessions for local, state, and federal law enforcement officers by request. We focus on the history, background, leaders, and activities of far-right extremists in the United States. These free training sessions last from 2 to 6 hours and are tailored to fit the requesting agency's requirements, from small police departments needing a basic introduction to the hate movement, to intelligence groups needing a more detailed, specialized briefing. SPLC trainers have almost 50 years of combined experience. They are California Post-Certified and Federal Law Enforcement Training Center certified. A lesson plan can be provided to the law enforcement agency to determine if a session qualifies for post-certification or for continuing education credits in that state. The trainers provide information that allows law enforcement officers to better protect their communities and their own safety. Law enforcement officers learn how to recognize hate groups, symbols, and activity, the threat potential of specific groups, and how to respond to hate group activity. End quote. All right, so this is incredibly biased, ignorant, and terrified police forces. Right? These police forces that look at every American citizen as an insurgent in occupied territory. That is it's greatly contributed to by the so-called training provided to the local police forces by the Southern Poverty Law Center. Now, if you remember the treacherous nature of the SPLC and their agenda to further divide the United States with this relentless race baiting and constant attacks on freedom of speech, freedom of thought, and freedom of expression, you also got to remember the SPLC's contribution to the law enforcement community and the American police state by virtue of this nonsensical training and this fear-mongering of police. So it's also funny that they refer to this as the hate movement, right? With such good growing numbers of precious white liberals that make up the SPLC, you would think that the hate movement would be dissipating, wouldn't it? And in fact, it was. The hate movement was largely dissipating. More of these groups, more of these white racist groups, most of them, they have big meetings, and 90% of the people that go to the meetings are either informants for the SPLC, FBI, or local law enforcement. So, with that being said, it's time. We've got to demand full transparency of the Southern Poverty Law Center if they're going to work with American intelligence agencies, and if they're going to work with American police forces. We want full transparency, and we want full transparency of the relationship to the American intelligence agencies and the foreign intelligence agencies that they work with. We want transparency of the relationships that they have with domestic law enforcement. In fact, I would argue, and I think it's time to demand, that the SPLC's relationship with any of these agencies, American intelligence, foreign intelligence, American police, foreign police, it's time for them to end completely. It needs to just be done away with, period. So, I think it's time to move on to another topic here. We'll just briefly touch on this. The article is Protests Across America. Will Obama Step Down? So we've had all of these issues, and we'll get back onto the NYPD and all that kind of stuff later on in the show, but we've had all these issues at Ferguson, Missouri over the Michael Brown killing. We've had the NYPD murder of Eric Garner. We've had a number of other shootings. Media just conveniently is covering the shootings now. You ask yourself why that is. But we've got protests, we've got riots, we've got other forms of violence and social social disintegration happening all across the country. Police brutality is out off the charts. Again, protests, all of this stuff. Years of authoritarianism, years of stagnant economy, years of police brutality. Is all this stuff has existed to stir the pot and provoke anger from the American people, and the steam valves have now been opened with protests across the country. Of course, they're aimed at the wrong direction. Police brutality protesters are aiming their anger at white people. Economic protesters, well, I don't know what they're doing. They have their head so far up their ass, it's right back out of their neck. And the average person, of course, is just blindly sitting on the couch watching television and eating chips for as long as that is possible. Now, with all of this happening, though, with relentless police killings, with protests in the street, and police killing American citizens left and right, flashback to 2011. This is shortly after the death squad operations funded by NATO, by the Gulf Cooperation Council, by Israel. This is shortly after they began in earnest inside Syria. Now, according to the Western media, these operatives, who were, in reality, they were killing Syrians indiscriminately in the streets. They were sniping them and implementing Sharia law, beheading people, all that kind of stuff. But according to the Western media, these people were peaceful protesters. Now, widespread chaos in the streets of Syrian cities was used as a justification by Western leaders like Barack Obama, like Hillary Clinton, and like Angela Merkel, Sarkozy, David Cameron, all these guys. That was ammunition for them to call for Assad to step down. Now, according to these Western leaders, peaceful protests across Syria were enough to warrant calls for Assad to step down as president of the country, and it was, I think it was Cameron who said that Assad needed to face the reality of the complete rejection of his regime by the Syrian people. Well, so with the massive civil unrest taking place all across the United States here in 2014, is the logical response now to demand that Barack Obama step down? If mass protests in Syria are enough to demand that Assad has lost his legitimacy, then why are mass protests across the United States not enough to demand that Obama has lost his own legitimacy? So while Assad was actually facing down terrorists, which were funded by foreign powers to destroy his country, headlines accused him of brutality, of oppression, of killing his own people, crimes against humanity, all of that in the Western press. Now, consider the history of police brutality in the United States, and consider the fact that police brutality is skyrocketing in terms of aggression, of police aggression and murder of American citizens, as well as the response to the protests, the head cracking of some of the protests. You can only imagine if what the headlines would be if the shoe were on the other foot. The mainstream outlets in the United States were quick to call for Assad to step down. So where are the headlines reading calling for Obama to step down? I mean, let's just use our imagination for a minute. What would the headlines be on the Western press, from the Western press if they wanted Obama to step down? Years of human rights violations reach tipping point in the U.S. How about international community? Obama has lost his legitimacy. How about Obama kills his own? How about authoritarian U.S. regime faces American spring? How about things like that? How about let's just try some more. How about U.S. cracks down on peaceful protesters, or military cracks down on civilians, or even better with the tear gas, Obama uses chemical weapons on civilians. So these protests came right as the U.S. Senate's torture report was released. And this is the report, of course, that admits that not only was the CIA using torture on a massive scale, but it did so with complicity and direction of the White House. And although the focus is placed on the shoulders of Bush and Cheney, you'd have to be a fool to believe that the U.S. is not continuing to torture people. In fact, some of that has been admitted But, what about the claims of torture and crimes against humanity? Well, you're not going to get them, because that kind of propaganda, those standards only exist for people that the United States wants to bomb. So, there we have it. Okay, we need to get on to the Australian Sydney siege. We've got, I'm sure we're going to try to catch up on some of the news that have happened over the last 2 weeks, and then try to touch on this water situation, and then maybe look toward a way forward, and we'll see what we can do in terms of that last part. I'd like to, since this is the New Year's Eve show. So I'll move on. Got this article, 5 reasons to question the official story of the Sydney siege. So the pro-war right-wingers are predictably using this attack as an example of how all Muslims are terrorists, and how only the total annihilation of Muslims and the implementation of police state tactics the only solution. Then you've got the pathetic left-wingers who are attempting to portray the gunman as a lone nut with no political motives as a justification for more anti-terror laws. So you got the vast majority of people in the middle here who just quake with fear for a few minutes and then move on to not giving a shit for the next 10 years. So let's look at the 5 questions here that I've got in the article, and then one needs to be updated, number 1 actually. So we've got this guy, Manharon Moniz. He also went by Mantegi Borojurdi. So he's Shiite, not Sunni. Well, that's point 1 in the article, but the fact is, alright, so there's questions about this, right? Mainstream reports have suggested that Moniz is yet another ISIS-style terrorist, and that he just finally attempted to meet his destiny by engaging in terrorist attacks in the West. There's a number of problems with that. First, when Moniz was taking over the television of the cafe there in Sydney, he requested to be provided with an ISIS flag, so he could hold up the ISIS flag in the cafe in the Sydney business district. The problem is that Moniz for years had been Shia, not Sunni. Now, Sunni is the brand of Islam that ISIS espouses. Shiite is the brand of Islam that comes from largely Iran, but it's present in Syria and Iraq as well. Both sects see their share of fundamentalism, no doubt, but the two don't mix. So why would a Shiite cleric, fundamentalist or otherwise, request an Islamic State flag at the scene of a crime for all the world to see? Well, there have been reports that Moniz actually converted to Sunni Islam. We don't know. I mean, those reports honestly are kind of scant. It's easy to say, oh well, he converted. You know, that's your defense when somebody says, when somebody points out the fact that the guy is Shiite, not Sunni. The response is then to come out and say, oh well, he converted. Now he's a Sunni. Now he's an Islamic fundamentalist. Well, there's questions about that, aren't there? Now, also, I didn't put this in the article, but there were initially reports that Moniz was not alone, that he had 2 people in there with him, but those reports initially, they disappeared relatively quickly, but they are something that should not be ignored. Now, number 2 here, is Moniz a liberal Muslim or a fundamentalist Muslim? Now, this absurd request for an Islamic State flag, right? This tends to lead people to believe that he is a fundamentalist Muslim, and the very act of what he did appears to show him in that light. But the fact is, Moniz was presented as a liberal Muslim, preaching a brand of tolerant and mainstream Islam. He actually did a number of interviews, right? Since 2013. But I mean, prior to 2013, Moniz was presented as a liberal Muslim who was preaching the tolerant Islam, the mainstream Islam, so much so that his home country of Iran wanted to kill him. But then there was the change. In 2013, all of a sudden, Moniz became a murderer, he became a terrorist, he became a fundamentalist, a radical Muslim. Now, we have A good article by Tony Carlucci, by the way, you might want to check up on. It's Who Created Cartoon Character Man Haroon Moniz Behind Sydney Siege Crisis. Tony Carlucci follows this stuff a lot as well. If you look at some of the interviews that Moniz did, Australian ABC, let me read you a quote by Moniz. This is the alleged fundamentalist, the guy who hates the West for our freedoms, right? He says, we can say Australia, Canada, England, USA, so many Western countries, they are religious societies. They don't say we are religious, but in fact the spirit of religion, we can see the spirit of religion in these societies. And some other countries in the Middle East, in Asia, they say we are Islamic, they have a name of Islamic, but in fact they are not religious societies and religious governments. Whenever I walk in the street, whenever I go out in Australia, I feel I am in a real religious society. I don't want to say it is perfect. We don't have a perfect society on the earth, but when we compare, if we compare Australia with Iran and other countries in the Middle East, we can say it is heaven. That is Moniz. That is your fundamentalist Muslim that committed a terrorist attack in Sydney. So these are hardly the words of Islamic terrorists filled with hatred for the West. But this is what Moniz is being portrayed as being in later years. So there's little evidence to the contrary, of course, that the guy who engaged in the terror attack was really Moniz. So, I mean, I'm not saying it's outside of the realm of possibility, but let's work on that assumption. The question then is, why the contradictory behavior? Why the different media portrayal of Moniz? Now, number 3 kind of answers that question. One is, Moniz served as a U.S., NATO, and Western interests as propaganda tool against Iran. So remember, before Moniz became the star of Sunday evening and Monday morning news, he was a convenient agent of propaganda against the government of Iran, which was a major target of NATO, a major target of the West, still is. So before Moniz or Bourjirdi, before he had his recent run-ins with the law and his role as the boogeyman in Australia for a week, he was presented as a victim of the Iranian regime who was in love with Western society. And I just read you that quote earlier. Australia's ABC did a number of interviews with him, and another one is entitled Religion Report. Actually, this is the name of Australian ABC's little segment called Religion Report. It went back to January 31st, 2001, and it describes Moniz in this way. It says, while in Sydney we talked to Ayatollah Mantegi Bourjirdi, an Iranian cleric espousing a liberal brand of Islam, dangerously liberal, as his views have led to his wife and 2 daughters being held hostage in Iran. So he then goes into this launch against propaganda against Iran. It claims that Moniz's family was in grave danger and that Moniz would be executed if he ever returned to Iran. He says, Moniz, interestingly enough, he says, to quote, in Iran, mostly I have been involved with the Ministry of Intelligence and Security. And he also says he was in contact with the United Nations regarding security issues in Iran. He says, more than 4 years I have not seen my family, and the Iranian regime doesn't let them come out. In fact, I can say they are hostage. As a hostage, the Iranian regime wants to make me silent because I have some secret information about the government and about their terrorist operations in the war. I sent a letter to the Secretary General of the United Nations, and somebody on behalf of Mr. Kofi Annan sent the answer, and they want to do something. I have hope, and I pray and ask God to solve my problem. So, number 4, did Moniz love his wife and fear for her safety, or did he kill her? So, remember, Moniz is saying that he is concerned for his wife, but he is also saying that his big problem was with Iran is that it was holding his family hostage. He was in personal danger. Because of his liberal teachings, his family was in danger. But in 2013, Moniz had a wife. He was facing charges on accessory before and after the fact to the murder of his ex-wife, Nolene Hassan Pal, who was 30 years old, stabbed 18 times and set alight outside a Western Sydney unit in April. Okay, well, from what I understand, the wife and kids in Iran were still in Iran, but this is another woman that he married in Australia. The details are a little sketchy here, but regardless, the murder, she was murdered, she was stabbed, she was set ablaze. That's That's not liberal at all. That's not loving and tolerant at all, is it? Now, he certainly wouldn't be the first person to kill his ex-wife, but concerns for the safety, of family members, being the family man and then being the stab my ex-wife 18 times and set her on fire man is a bit contradictory. If Moniz was truly the hate sheikh, as he was presented later in the Western media, why was he portrayed as being a loving liberal by the very same media early on? So we also got to note that Moniz recently made a reputation for himself by sending hate mail to the families of dead Australian soldiers who fought in Afghanistan. And he was able to stir up tension between the pro and anti-war factions in Australian society and cause quite the controversy publicly. So we got a number of 5 here. Shiite clerics in Australia did not trust Moniz. In 2008, Shiite religious leaders in Australia had asked Australian federal security agents to investigate Moniz and his activities. This was a request by Shiite religious leaders in Australia. This was a request by them because they didn't know this guy. So there's an article in the Australian, and this is what it says. Federal agents have been urged by the nation's senior Shia leader Kamal Musalmani to investigate an Iranian man purporting to be a prominent Islamic cleric. Sheikh Musalmani told the Australian yesterday the mystery cleric, who has been identified as Ayatollah Mantegi Bourjerdi on his website after appearing under the name Sheikh Harun, was not a genuine Shia spiritual leader. He said there were no Ayatollahs, supreme Shia scholars, in Australia, and none of his fellow spiritual leaders knew who Ayatollah Bourjerdi or Sheikh Harun was. We don't know him, and we have got nothing to do with him, Sheikh Musalmani said. The federal police should investigate who he is. It should be their responsibility. But it was the Australian media itself that introduced Moniz as Ayatollah, and it was the Australian government that granted him political asylum. So he was in contact, he allegedly, according to him, was in contact with the United Nations, and he was used to stir up anti-Iranian sentiment in Australia. So it's very suspicious that now all of a sudden the Australian media and the Australian government appear to just have no idea who this guy was or where he came from, despite the fact that there were a number of articles out there on him to begin with. So whatever the true nature of this guy might be, whether he's a legitimate mental patient, whether he's a patsy, whether he's a tool of Western intelligence agencies, there's much more to the story than what the mainstream press is printing and promoting. So the only thing we can say with certainty is that the Sydney siege will be used as propaganda to the utmost effect by all Western governments and NATO governments in the push for more war. And I think we're seeing that bearing out to be true. So what, of course, did we see immediately after the attacks? But was the Australian government coming out and seeking more anti-terrorism laws, and you didn't have to look very far to see this happening. So the article, Sydney Siege Aftermath, Australian Government Seeks More Anti-Terrorism Laws. This is up at BrandonTurbeville.com and Activist Post as well. Just to mention this, and we'll move through this pretty fast so I can get to the year-end discussion if possible. On December 16th, the Australian Parliament was hearing testimony by Federal Police Commissioner Andrew Colvin, who, quote, warned of grave implications for terrorism investigations if telecommunications companies are not forced to keep phone and internet data. In other words, the apocalypse will happen if we can't keep all of your personal conversations and interactions on file here in the database. He says, I could not understate enough that it would have grave implications for law enforcement's ability in this country to investigate, deter, and disrupt potential terrorist acts. He also says that as new telecom companies enter the market, there's less data being collected, and what data is being collected is being held for shorter periods. Well, that's bull. That's absolutely crap. That data is being recorded. That data is being kept regardless of smaller companies or larger companies. So the inquiry comes as a part of the Joint Intelligence Security Committee's, quote, debate over a third round of oppressive laws regarding phone and computer data collection and retention. So These inquiries have conveniently come on the heels of the Sydney siege. Lawmakers are asking whether or not these measures could serve to prevent lone wolf attacks. Right, so just on the heels of the Sydney siege, now the question is whether or not these laws can prevent lone wolf attacks. A separate inquiry is requested to determine if these laws could prevent events like Sydney siege, but the committee is, quote, set to examine the next package of proposed counterterrorism laws in the future. So that's where we stand. The committees, if you look at the people who are on the committees, they're anything but people who are averse to greater spying and greater police state, surveillance state, right? One of the people who are on the committee is considered Australia's top spy. That's ACO's Director General Duncan Lewis, who's the Australian, as well as the Australian Crime Commission and the Attorney General's office is on that commission. So this is the third round of terrorism laws that have been passed in Australia since for the last few months. Right, we've had the first and second round of surveillance and anti-terrorism bills in Australia that came earlier in the year. The National Security Legislation Amendment, that was Bill number 1 in 2014, passed with bipartisan support. Big surprise. And let's go through what some of the law allows the Australian government to do. So the National Security Legislation Amendment, what it will do, it allows the Australian spy agencies to have the power to monitor the entire Australian internet with just one warrant, essentially. And journalists, whistleblowers can face up to 10 years in jail for disclosing classified information. So the first group of bills or laws that came out shored up the powers of domestic spy agencies like ACO. It passed by the Senate by 44 votes to 12, bipartisan support. Anybody, including journalists, whistleblowers, bloggers who, quote, recklessly disclose information that relates to a special intelligence operation can face up to 10 years in jail. And any operation can be declared special by an authorized ACO officer. So this gives ACO's immunity, it gives ACO immunity for criminal and civil liability in certain circumstances. Lawyers, academics, a lot of them have said that they fear the agency will abuse its power. Yeah, well, of course they'll abuse the power. The power, they shouldn't even have the power to begin with. But anybody who identifies ACO agents could face a decade in prison under the new bill, which is a tenfold increase in the existing maximum penalty. The bill also allows ACO to seek just one warrant to access a limitless number of computers on a computer network when attempting to monitor a target. Right. So essentially, what they do is they are allowed to get one search warrant for one computer. But if that computer is a part of a network, then they can essentially search the whole network. So you get a search warrant for a network. Well, any two computers makes a network, but any computer essentially is hooked up to the big network of the internet. So you get one search warrant, and it essentially allows you to search all computers based on one computer being hooked up to the network. So it says this would effectively allow the entire internet to be monitored as it is a network of networks, and the bill does not specifically define what a computer network is. So by its liberal definition of network, this means that, as I just said, that one search warrant for one computer actually means an open search warrant for all computers. So just assume that all of your computers are being searched. You should have been assuming that anyway in Australia, in the United States, in any country. So ACO will be able to copy, delete, modify the data held on any of the computers it has a warrant to monitor. So it can copy, delete, or modify the data. The bill also allows ACO to disrupt target computers. Remember the people, or the internet conspiracy people who constantly say they're being attacked on the computer. Sometimes it's because they don't know how to work the equipment, but sometimes they really are being disrupted. They also allow use of innocent third-party computers not targeted in order to access a target computer. So that bill passed, and there was the second bill, the Foreign Fighters Bill, which was submitted shortly after the passage of the first bill that I just mentioned. And this bill, this is the bill's own language. It's create new offenses for advocating terrorism and for entering or remaining in a declared zone, broaden the criteria and streamline the process for the listing of terrorist organizations, extend instances in which a control order may be sought, extend the sunsetting provisions of the preventative detention order and control order regimes, and include a sunset clause for the declared zone offense, provide certain law enforcement agencies with additional tools needed to investigate, arrest, and prosecute those supporting foreign conflicts. Now we've got this third round coming up. So we will probably tackle this again on the next show so we can get into more detail in terms of these counterterrorism laws. But we'll also want to mention we're coming up on 2015. Now, 2014 has not been a very good year for activism. It's been pretty bad, to be honest. So you got a week or so to take a break, to reflect, and I'd encourage you to do it. Certainly need to keep up the pace of what we're doing, but at the same time, a lot of the activists and a lot of the researchers have indeed dropped the ball, and a lot of the individuals here in the alternative media have been pulled back into the direction of working for the system. It's been a major color revolution turn of events for American activists and world activists, and this applies not only to the libertarians who essentially act as a wing of the Republican Party, but also many anarchists who are acting as, ironically, wings of the Democratic Party. I guess we have the anarcho-communists and the anarcho-capitalists, and you are not doing yourselves any favors. And of course we've got the people in between who are still trying to work within a system that's set up that is designed to keep you from bringing about any change. And I wish we'd have gotten to that. I largely kept my promise. We talked about all the things I wanted to talk about, but not that. So I guess that will be the first show of 2015. So plan on that next week when we do this show, the first show of 2015. We'll be talking about what we can do going forward, what we're going to do for the new year, and how we're going to approach these things. So, ladies and gentlemen, stick with us here. Be back next Monday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on UCY.tv, and we'll try to point the direction for the movement, point the way forward for activists out there and listeners, readers, researchers, writers, whatever you are. We'll try to point the right direction for us to go in for 2015. Hopefully it'll be a better year for us, and it'll be a better year for humanity in general. So ladies and gentlemen, this has been Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. We'll see you next week.